Good morning and welcome to Morning Scoop for Saturday, February 12th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The spring game is in 63 days, the Notre Dame game in 203 days, the game against Michigan in 287 days. The Super Bowl is tomorrow, and that's not necessarily something we typically spend an episode discussing, but with not only an Ohio team playing in the game, but one with a bunch of former Buckeyes on it, it seemed like something that a decent slice of our audience would be interested in. So I'm joined today by Marcus Hartman of the Dayton Daily News. He has been very busy covering the game from a bunch of angles this week. Marcus, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I guess before we get into this year's game, you just wrote a piece about another couple of former Buckeyes and their memories of the Super Bowl in previous years. So can you let people know, first of all, where they can find that story, and then maybe one of the things that you learned talking to those guys?
Yeah, DaytonDailyNews.com. You can find, I wanted to, get as many flashbacks, local Super Bowl guys as I could. And the couple of guys that I was able to track down were Jim Lachey and Keith Byers, who coincidentally both went to Ohio State as well. Keith Byers being from Dayton, and Jim Lachey is from St. Henry. So they both, they were sort of at opposite ends of the spectrum in that Lachey got to the Super Bowl with a totally loaded Redskins team that had won before he got there, and it was sort of at the height of his powers. He was, I think that was his second or third year being named All-Pro. He was like 28, so it was right at his very best of his career. And the Redskins went and they just throttled Buffalo in the Super Bowl. That was Buffalo's third loss in a row, I think. It was either the second or the third one. And they went and they just kind of pounded him. And so it was a major triumph for him. And something that I learned from him is that I asked him, what was the reaction like? Was there a party in St. Henry? And he said, well, I don't know, because back then the Pro Bowl was after the Super Bowl. And so I got on we did stuff after the game, and then I had to fly to Honolulu at like 4 a.m. or something like that. And then he was out there for a couple of weeks. And when he came home, his wife had their first child. So it was, there was not a honeymoon for the Super Bowl as far as that goes. It was really I said, well, that's really the pinnacle, right? Then you win, you're at the height of your athletic success, and then also you start a family. Like that's a heck of a couple of weeks. And he said, yeah, for sure. And that was also, he was kind of a notable part of that, is that was one of the first like famous offensive lines that for people that are younger, the Hogs were like a really well-known offensive line for the Redskins, and they dominated Buffalo, who and managed to basically eliminate Bruce Smith, who was their Hall of Fame pass rusher, didn't really do anything in the game. And Jim was pretty modest about the whole thing. He said, well, he was kind of had a knee injury, so maybe he wasn't at full strength or whatever. But the fact is the fact that they were able to run all over Buffalo, and they threw the ball all over him and just dominated the game. I said, you were really part of that era when the Super Bowl was boring. I guess that's good for you, I guess. And he said, yeah, it kind of is, at least in that scenario. And then on the other end of the spectrum was Keith Byers. Made it late in his career. He made the Super Bowl. It was, I believe, 31 with, it was the January 96 Super Bowl with the Patriots. And that was they were his third or fourth team. And he still was an important player, but he was not their first or second option by any means. He was kind of a pass catching fullback back in the days when that was a thing. And so he scored a touchdown in the game. And that was also one where, ironically, Desmond Howard was the hero for Green Bay, and like the only meaningful game he ever played in the NFL. He happened to have a couple of big returns, and including one that sort of, as soon as New England had gotten to within a touchdown, he returned the ensuing kickoff for a touchdown, sort of put the game back away for Green Bay. That was Brett Favre's Super Bowl win. Came at the expense of Keith Byers. So I asked him, and I said, well, thanks for giving me a call. I wasn't sure if you'd want to talk about it. And he was kind of, we're on this bad end of things. And he said, oh, I don't feel about that way at all. But obviously, I'm disappointed that we lost, but I'm much happier that I got to play in it and lost than not playing it at all. He said he went to a couple as a fan. The first couple years he was in the NFL, one was to see Pepper Johnson. He said who was playing for the Giants. He said, that was his best friend. He wanted to support him. And he went the following year because he wanted to watch Doug Williams be the first black quarterback to start in the Super Bowl. But he said, looking around, and after that one, he decided, he goes, I don't want to come back here until I'm playing. This is interesting, but now this is a little too tough for me to be around. And he had to wait till he was 33. I believe it was his ninth or 10th year, and he did make it. And, other than winning, he said everything really lived up to the hype. And and he's still proud to this day that he played in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, a couple great Buckeye villains that we kind of are touching on, or sort of ancillary, touching on in sort of a indirect way. Desmond Howard, you mentioned, one of the other Hogs, of course, along with Jim Lachey on some of those 1980s Joe Gibbs offensive lines. Mark May, who you may remember from such post-game shows as the ones you were throwing your remote at probably 5-10 years ago. As far as this year's game goes, we mentioned there's a lot of Buckeye, former Buckeyes and guys who played for Ohio State but didn't necessarily graduate from there. But, obviously the headline name is Joe Burrow. Tony Gertman and I are actually going to talk a bunch about Burrow on tomorrow's show. So we're actually going to start with some of the other former Buckeyes in this game. One of them is Sam Hubbard. He has 3 sacks in the playoffs, which is tied for the second most of any player this postseason, which, seems good. He has turned into like a real steal for the Bengals since they picked him 77th overall back in 2018, and he has really blossomed into a lot more than you'd necessarily expect to get from that kind of draft pick.
Yeah, I think he became a starter full-time last year. He's played since he's been on there. He was a situational pass rusher for a while, and now he's been really one of the stalwarts. He signed a contract extension before the season, so they've got him locked up now through his prime, that he's been identified as one of their core guys in the locker room and on the field. Excuse me. And, he really, not only does he have solid numbers, but he was kind of the very key player against the Chiefs in that in the second half, the Bengals did a lot more drop 8 with him spying Mahomes, which really kind of just threw the Chiefs out of rhythm for the entire second half. He had a couple of sacks there very late in the game, including he forced a fumble. He almost won the game himself on the next to last play of regulation as he had Mahomes scrambling and knocked the ball free, and ironically, another local guy for us, Alter graduate Joe Tooney, was there. He's a right guard. He was one of the big free agent signings of the offseason. He managed to jump on the ball and set up a field goal for Kansas City to send it to overtime. But Hubbard is really kind of a Swiss Army knife. He can do a lot of different things, and he's a hometown guy who has just been Mr. Reliable and will make plays. Really, he's benefited from their big offseason free agent signing was Trey Hendrickson, who's the other end, and those two guys have really played off each other, and it's one of those things where one guy makes the other guy better because you can't really double team either of them, and so they've been really strong throughout the year. I think you knew that he had a low floor, or he had a high floor when the Bengals picked him, but there's third and fourth round picks. Sometimes they turn out to be studs. Sometimes they're just reliable guys. And he has really been, everything they could have wanted and more. He also can slide down inside and rush the passer and stuff like that too. And they've done a variety of things defensively, and he's proven to be up to the task on all those things. And he was the guy, and then the other guy that coming into the year you expected to play a big role for the defense was Vonn Bell, who they brought in as a free agent last year. And he's funny because, if you're an Ohio State fan who's been following the Vonn Bell experience all along, he was like the number 1 recruit in his class and then didn't do a whole lot his freshman year. He's one of those guys, every year there's a guy that people want to see nonstop their freshman year and they don't get to see him and they're disappointed. And he was that guy. I think it was pretty obvious that he should have been playing more because he couldn't have been any worse than the guys who were playing. But nonetheless, he had that, then ended up having an All-American career at Ohio State. He went to the Saints, and he was a guy that you sort of, if you're not a Saints fan, you don't know. Yeah, he's just a solid player. So he's not a guy out here who's making the Pro Bowl or anything like that, but he's obviously not. He's obviously good enough to be starting. He comes to the Bengals as a free agent. He was not in like the first tier of free agents. He was in the second tier. So you're bringing him in as maybe a depth type guy, but he's been more than that for them. He's another super strong locker room guy. They credit him for kind of setting the tone as far as work ethic and things like that. And he doesn't necessarily talk a lot, but when he talks, people listen, and he's really has a good message for everybody. And he's had a really good year. I mean, he's had a good grade from Pro Football Focus. He is just a solid guy in run support, in coverage. They do a lot with their safeties in terms of disguising things and things like that. He had the big interception against the Chiefs. I posted the last 5 Chiefs plays that they ran included 2 sacks by an Ohio State player, a pass breakup by an Ohio State player, and an interception by an Ohio State player. And 4 of the last 5 plays for the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game. So Bell has kind of been Johnny on the spot at times too. So you've got those guys as being the really strong starters all year, locker room presence. And then the third guy on the defense has been Eli Apple, who they brought in. He's a guy who was a first-round pick and then was kind of been disappointing. He'd bounced around a couple of different teams. They brought him in training camp when they had some injuries, just kind of took a flyer on a guy, with first-round talent who hadn't worked out. And he had a rough beginning to the season. Teams were targeting him a lot the first month of the season. He was getting beat a lot. And he has really come on in the second half as there's just been continued injuries at cornerback. He made the play. He broke up a pass that led to an interception to win the Titans game. And he actually dropped a potential game-winning interception against the Chiefs, and then Bell picked him up the next play. And so Apple has been kind of a pleasant surprise. And he's also a guy, again, when you're a cornerback, you're in the middle of lots of big plays one way or the other. He's got pretty solid Pro Football Focus grades as well, and so he does have some big hero or GOAT potential when you talk about what kind of a matchup you'll be seeing with him this week. So it'll be interesting to see how that if he plays well and is not if no one's cursing him on Sunday night, that means things are probably going pretty well for the Bengals. And then the fourth guy is also a surprise guy, and that's Isaiah Prince.
Yeah,
who he's a guy, he opted out last year. As he was again he was drafted by somebody else, I don't remember who, and they brought him in partway through 2019. And he was just an extra guy, I think was on the practice squad part of the time. He opted out last year, and then this year, he's their seventh or eighth guy, but because of injuries, he's had to play a lot, and he's been the starter the last few games because Riley Reif, who was one of their free agent signings, had a season-ending injury in about week 14 or 15. So Prince has been the guy since then. He had been playing off and on before that as well, and he has been okay. I mean, he's struggled at times. He's held his own at times. He will be playing a huge role this week because the Rams, their pass rush is really their thing, and they've got two elite ends, and then they've got Aaron Donald inside. So you can't necessarily do a lot of helping those tackles if you want to be able to handle all the different things that the Rams do. So he will be, you will probably hear Isaiah Prince's number called a few times. You want it to not be too many times on Sunday night. And again, he's one of those guys, if he doesn't have to be great, but if he can just hold his own, that will help Burrow a lot.
Prince is such an interesting story because he had this really up and down career with Ohio State. He came in very highly touted, and then I say Isaiah Prince to an audience full of Ohio State fans, and everyone says 2016 Penn State. And not in a good way. And then you remember the next year after that Penn State game, 2017, he was on the field. I had a picture of him and Jamarco Jones. Prince was just sobbing, just the joy that he felt after just a really terrible experience at Penn State the year before, and the aftermath of that, where his teammates had to take his phone away and all that kind of stuff because fans were being so brutal to him. I mean, he had kind of an up and down career at Ohio State, but yeah, it was the Dolphins, I think he got drafted by, and then you mentioned he opted out. And then, this is one of those, it's kind of a feel-good story where it's, the guy who gets picked second overall, it's like, yes, you should be a starter in the Super Bowl at some point if you're a tackle, if you're picked number 2 overall. He was like a 5th or 6th round pick, if I remember correctly. For him to have had the career he had at Ohio State, which was, a little up and down and had some tough moments, to get drafted. And then, he didn't win a starting job out of camp, but he has started through this whole playoff run and is now starting the Super Bowl. I mean, that's kind of one of those really good, feel-good sports stories.
Yeah, it's always interesting to follow those guys who are, the elite recruits are one thing, but the guys, it's not like he was like a last-minute addition to Ohio State's class. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was a big-time recruit, too. So it's interesting to see some of those guys, if maybe there's a little more they can unlock when they get to the NFL, or if that means they have enough ability to hang on, or just kind of, it gives you a little bit when you pick up a guy like that, and I'm sure especially that's what they were thinking with Apple, is you go, well, maybe this guy's got a little more upside than your typical 5th round pick, and so they're getting some of that out of him. The Bengals are funny. Their offensive line, it's a lightning rod for everybody, obviously, but they're weird because which isn't going to help them much this week. But basically, if they're not facing an elite rusher, they've been fine. But they can't deal with the elite guys at all. It's 0 or nothing. It's 0 or 100, basically. When they played the 49ers, fans were complaining about the play calling because it was pretty conservative. They ran the ball a lot. But when they got down in the last 2 minutes and they had to go down the field and they had to throw, literally every play, Joey Bosa was beating Prince. Like literally every play. You could just watch him, just toss him aside and be on Burrow. And so that's why you've got to, there's an art to kind of managing the game because they can't handle the Garretts and the Bosas and then this week the Von Millers. But they've not been just terrible against everybody. It's really been kind of odd the way that that's worked out, where they've actually been decent if it wasn't like one of the guys who's in the top 5% of pass rushers. Like I said, that won't help them much this week because they're going to face guys like that. But it's been interesting to watch that from that standpoint. And, he's still a young guy. Maybe there's a little more that he can kind of wring out of his career. I'm sure that they've got like $50 million under the cap. I'm sure that they could go out and sign 2 offensive linemen and draft another one. So it'd probably be hard for him to hang on to a roster spot next year, at least as a starter. But he's, especially if they win it, he's the kind of, there's all kinds of stories like that where you've got to have a guy, guys that come through that you weren't necessarily expecting a lot out of.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of those interesting stories because they gave up 9 sacks to the Titans in the divisional round. And still won the game. Is that kind of, pass pro has obviously, as you mentioned, been sort of an on and off issue when you're facing Nick Bosa, bad things happen to your quarterback sometimes. And pass pro, as you said, has sort of been an issue for them. Is that kind of the key to the game? Like, is that the biggest key to a win for the Bengals this weekend is keep Joe Burrow upright, give him just enough time and things probably go well? Or if not, what is the one key to the game for them?
Yeah, well, it's as far as like a styles make fights type of a game. It is, again, like you can tell the difference between people who ever like interview football coaches and write about sports versus the people who just write about sports based on what they think they know. Because, yeah, when you've got Joe Burrow, yeah, sure, he should just throw 50 times every game because he's that good, right? But every time he drops back, there's a chance he's going to get sacked. So you've got to kind of manage those opportunities for him to get sacked and just say, okay, well, our potential chance times that we might make a big play are reduced, but we just got to get the most out of those plays to try to survive. And so I think that's what this game is going to be like. I don't think they can give up 9 sacks again. The Titans thing was a little bit weird because that was actually more scheme stuff than they were just getting beaten one-on-one. They just had some blown assignments and Burrow holds the ball an extra tick. Like half of the sacks are Burrow like taking sacks he maybe doesn't have to take, but that's part of the Burrow thing because he also, if he's able to hang on to the ball, sometimes he can find somebody open and make a big play and get something out of it. So for sure, the pass protection has to be decent. The offensive line can't just get completely manhandled. They've got to be decent. You got to give Burrow and the receivers a chance to make some big plays. The way I look at this game is if there's 115 plays in this game, the Bengals are probably going to lose like more, they're going to lose a majority of the plays most likely. But if they can win the 15 most important plays in the game, then putting aside turnovers even, then they've got a good chance to win, I think. If they can just squeeze out some big plays, they can try to outlast them. And because the Rams are more talented across the board, and like Keith Byers said yesterday, he said if the Rams could blow out the Bengals, but if it's close, he likes the Bengals because you've got Burrow and they've been making all these clutch plays. On the flip side, Stafford led the league in interceptions, and he's a guy who's a number 1 overall pick. He's kind of the opposite of Burrow. He led the league in interceptions this year. He's always put up big numbers, but he's been kind of suspect just in terms of consistency. So, the path to victory is fairly obvious for the Bengals. They need to avoid disaster on offense, make a handful of big plays, and if they can get a few turnovers, then they're really you can definitely see them winning. If it's just a matter of who's going to win snap to snap, you've got to probably go with the Rams, especially because the Bengals defense, if you look at their numbers for the year, they're pretty average. They've been very opportunistic though. And again, as far as the style makes fights thing, the Bengals might run the ball a little too much from an efficiency standpoint, but it's obviously to protect Burrow. The Rams are one of these more new age teams that they're not bad at running the ball, but they don't really want to run it. So they only run it as much as they have to. So it'll be interesting to see how much they decide they have to in this game versus trying to to stay with what they do and make pass plays when they've got a quarterback who will make mistakes, and the Bengals secondary has been pretty good, and they have a good pass rush, but because the Rams also have a very good offensive line. So it'll be interesting to see just sort of how some of these things play out, because then on the other side, the Rams are also one of these teams that is okay with you running the ball on them a little bit, because they think that for two reasons. One, they have Aaron Donald, who can help make you wrong even from a number standpoint. He can erase a guy. But two, again, like, the name of the game is explosive plays. So the more times you run the ball, maybe you're reducing the number of potential explosive plays you have, and they're fine with that. But I think if you're the Bengals, you want to shorten the game. You want there to be, if there's 5 plays in this game, but Jamar Chase catches 2 touchdown passes, you're happy with that. So it's be interesting to see just how these teams approach that from that standpoint in terms of what their general philosophies are.
And so we've touched on a bunch of the Bengals who went to Ohio State, where with Ohio State ties. As far as I'm aware, I think I looked at the Rams roster. I think Jordan Fuller is the only guy for the Rams who is listed from Ohio State. He has suffered a season-ending leg injury just a couple weeks ago, so should not be any Buckeyes on that side of the ball. So
yeah, and really Fuller's absence is potentially one of the big stories too. They've been they ended up having to sign Eric Weddle off the street to replace him. So safety is a huge question mark for them. And the Bengals' number one way to win is they need to get 2 50-yard passes at least, or maybe more. And because they're going to lose, their success rate is probably not going to be great. But if they can make enough explosive plays, it'll be worth it. So obviously the safeties, the other one of the big storylines is Jalen Ramsey against Jamar Chase. If he can play one-on-one and contain Chase, then the Bengals are in big trouble, because then they've got enough people to kind of deal with some of their other threats. If Chase wins a handful of those matchups, then that could be a big thing also. Because the funny thing, the Chiefs game, the Chiefs did not, they said, well, we're not going to lose to Chase. They only gave him like 5 or 6 opportunities. And the Bengals, like, Burrow was so good. Literally any time that he had one-on-one, bang, that's where he was going. And he caught, a touchdown pass and a couple of big conversions. So it was like, he's going to maximize all the opportunities you give him with Chase. So now how does that come down to what is an opportunity and what's not when you're being covered by Jalen Ramsey? We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, that's going to be another fun thing to watch. And, I'm sure I don't need to preach to Ohio State fans about what a defense looks like with Jordan Fuller at the top of it. And before and after Jordan Fuller is at the top of a defense, the audience of this podcast is probably well aware of that. So that'll be
right.
That'll be a fun thing to watch later on tonight as well. Marcus, let people know where they can find you on Twitter, and then where they can find your coverage of the game.
Well, it's Marcus Hartman on Twitter, easy enough. And, we have DaytonDailyNews.com, JournalNews.com for people in northern Cincinnati, and then SpringfieldNewsSun.com. All of our NFL and Ohio State coverage will end up in all 3 of those sites, whichever one you prefer. And we will, we'll have all kinds of things. I'm not exactly sure what I'll be doing for the game. I'm sure I'll have something after it's over. We have a couple of people out there covering everything. There's always an Ohio State angle. I've got the list, and I don't have it memorized, but of Ohio State players who have won the Super Bowl and a national championship. So you've got Bell and Apple trying to join that list. I think it's 14 guys if you count the guys on the injured reserve, which I do. And the last, there's already a couple guys from their class. It was Darren Lee has already won the Super Bowl. I think he was on the injured reserve too, or the practice squad or something with the Chiefs 2 years ago. So these are some more guys that can join that list. It's kind of interesting because there were no national championships for 30 years, so there's a bunch of great players who are not eligible to make this list. But then you have guys like Mike Doss who did, and I believe Will Smith, but you have to, a lot of the other ones you have to go back to the 60s or the 70s. So it's that'll be something else to watch. I will have that, because there will be at least one, because again Fuller will count even though he's not going to play in the game. So Jordan Fuller, I guess, didn't win the national championship. So there will not necessarily be one that joins that list. You'll have another Ohio State player winning the Super Bowl. We may or may not get someone who joins that list of guys with the national championship and a Super Bowl, as far as that goes. But I don't know if we'll have any more Mike Dosses who won the state championship, the national championship, and the Super Bowl, but I have to do some more research on that.
Yeah, and Joe Burrow didn't win the national championship at Ohio State, but he did he win the state championship, or did he lose in the final? They lost in the finals,
senior year,
right?
they lost to Toledo Central Catholic, and it was one of those games where I said, well, all these guys from Athens just learned that life is not fair, because Toledo Central Catholic is just going to recruit 10 more studs to replace these guys that are graduating, and you guys who are just, this is the best team you'll ever have with the homegrown quarterback and probably all these guys that have been playing football together since they were like 8 years old. But it was a crazy game where Burrow threw for like 500 yards and however many touchdowns, but every time, so they would go down the field passing, and then Toledo Central Catholic would just run the ball down their throats on the phone. So it would be like pass, touchdown, run, touchdown, and the final was like 52-45 or something like that. It was a wild game. It's one of those years when it was at Ohio Stadium as well. And that was in 14, that was during the run while Ohio State is doing all these wild things. That's right when the Ohio State's about to go on this crazy run that nobody expected. Burrow is finishing up his high school career.
Yeah, I was just thinking back. I remembered that game being a wild game, and I started questioning myself who actually ended up winning that game, because I remember them scoring a lot, but not quite enough. So, well, that we'll see if Joe Burrow can score enough to win a championship tonight. That'll be hopefully, even if you're not a Bengals fan, you as an Ohio State fan maybe have a little bit of a rooting interest that you can support the Bengals tonight, even if you are a Steelers or Browns or whatever else fan. So thank you again to Marcus for joining me. Make sure you check out his coverage. Make sure you follow him on Twitter. Sure, there's going to be plenty of interesting stuff coming out of that Super Bowl game tonight. And make sure you also check out all of our great podcasts from the Buckeye Scoop Podcast Network. Tony Girdman and I do Buckeye Weekly. Kevin Noon does Big Me Kickoff. Mark Givler and Bill Green do Gives in the Bank. Alex Gleitman does the Around the Oval podcast. All great shows. You can subscribe on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. You can also leave us a 5-star rating and review, which we do genuinely appreciate. And if you prefer to watch us instead of listen to us, throw us up on your TV at youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. And you can, once again, hit that thumbs up button. That helps other folks find these shows. Whenever you're watching one of our episodes, just hit that thumbs up. And then if you want to make sure you never miss an episode, hit that bell, subscribe to our channel, and then you get notified every time we post a new episode of all these shows, new camp videos, new interviews, all that good stuff, all at youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.